So welcome. Let's go ahead and pray. Father, thank you so much for this time. Thank you for helping us with this information. I just pray, Father, that you would open our hearts so we could learn more about you, because that's really what everything's about. We just ask this in Jesus' name. All right, so welcome. So we're going to have a kind of a large class today, a little bit larger because Jeff is on vacation. So all the people who said, I really don't want to go see John, they can come in and see how wonderful and yeah, whatever. So, yeah. So anyway, so we're doing polytheism. So guys, why are we doing polytheism? And what does polytheism mean if you haven't been in my class up till now? Polytheism basically means the understanding, worshiping of multiple gods. It's the number one problem Israel had in the Old Testament. Number one, above everything else, problem was polytheism for 800 years. It started in Judges all the way through the end of Jeremiah, Daniel, and all that. So polytheism was a main theme. So the thing is, with what I'm trying to do in this class, is my goal is to help you understand the Old Testament. More than anything else, that's what I want. Even though we're going to do some stuff with the prophets, we are going to see that. But the goal is, when you read the Old Testament, I'm trying to give you the tools you need to kind of understand the Old Testament. Okay? So, for instance, if you want to understand the book of 1 John, the best thing to do is to go and do some little bit of research about what 1 John was actually talking about. Understanding that John, at the time it was written, was towards the end of the first century. There were no other apostles alive. He was combating all kinds of junk, especially Gnosticism, which really was Greek and Roman philosophy. If you understand that little bit right there, when you read 1 John, you're going to start saying, now I understand what he means by this. So that's going to be the homework for this week. I'm going to have you guys do some research of 3 different prophetic books. Because again, if you do a little research of this, then you're going to find that this stuff becomes a lot easier to understand. So that's why we're spending 2 weeks on polytheism. Because again, polytheism is the number one problem they had. So why are we talking about it? Because most of what God said in Exodus, Deuteronomy, and through the prophets was said for a reason. And usually it was because of that, polytheism. So what we're doing is I'm really focusing on the people around them, because the people around them, meaning, for instance, Assyrians, Babylonians, Moabites, Edomites, all those guys, all the Ite brothers. All of those guys, we're focusing on that because help you to understand what their influence, because their influence is what directly impacted Israel. Their influence is also, when the people that they left in Israel, they didn't get rid of like they were supposed to, had a direct impact on them. We're going to finish this up next week, and if you did not go to last week's class, I highly recommend you going and watching it. Now, my goal with this is to combine about 24 weeks worth of information in 12 weeks. That's why we give homework. If you notice why John the Dummy put all this homework out there for the last month and a half, 2 months, that's why. Because my goal is, what I can't give you in this short class, I'm going to try to give it to you, because what I was doing is I'm meeting with Jeff and saying, I don't know how to give him all this information. So I prayed about it and said, well, how about I just give him some stuff to begin and homework. Now, did anybody, I hate even to ask this question, did anybody do last week's homework? All right. Did you do, look the verses up that I gave you with Aside a philosopher? Okay. Now, guys, the whole thing is, this class is designed to help you to understand the information based upon the homework also. For instance, the homework was basically to describe God the way, so when what the guy was doing, he was writing to a Caesar in Rome who was a polytheist, trying to describe God to a polytheist. Seriously, that's what the whole thing was about. Thus, all of the stuff we went last week, about God and what we're going to talk about today about this is that he wrote that in his apology describing God. So you're going to see a marked difference between what we're talking about here in class and what the idea of God in the Bible. Because what I did is I took that thing and I put all the Bible verses in it. So when you look them up, you're now going to see who is the God of the Bible versus who is the God that everybody else is thinking about, including Rome and Greece. So if you have not done it, please, please, please do it. If you need me to send it to you, I will. I highly recommend it because I promise you, if you want to understand the Old Testament, you got to get the information. That's why Old Testament is so hard to learn. You got a lot of information to try to dig through. All right, so let's talk about this week's. All right, let's talk a little back about last week. We talked about polytheism. We said that polytheism really was kind of an amalgam of three major things: Hollywood, a little strange, science, and anthropomorphism. All three strange things. You're going, what the heck is this guy talking about? All right, well, Hollywood they would come up with elaborate stories. If you ever read like the Gilgamesh epic, or you've ever read some of the epics, Akkadian epics, or the epics from Babylonia, those guys, they would come up with these stuff. Or even if you read Homer, Iliad and the Odyssey, they would come up with all this stuff, and none of it was proven or true, but that's what they came up with. And it's just like us with Hollywood. Hollywood, they've got some crazy stuff going on with all kinds of things. Humans becoming aliens, humans becoming this, humans becoming that. That's the whole key. It's all about humans. Anthropomorphism, meaning that everything in polytheism was based upon what a human trait would be like. The gods acted like humans. They committed crimes, they lied, they slumbered, they slept, they were defeated, they fought with each other, they hated each other, they were fickle. These are the people that all the surrounding nations, including Israel, was looking to, these kind of people. But God in the Bible said very, very specific things about himself. I am not a God that should lie. I never slumber nor sleep. I'm not a man, that I should change my mind. The Lord, he says, I never change. He said, if I'm hungry, I'm not going to tell you about it. See, those are strange things. But what I'm trying to do with all this is help you to see why he actually said those things. In the Psalms, when God says, if I were hungry, I'm not going to tell you about it. Why the heck should God even say that? We're going to figure it out today because we're going to talk about some of that stuff. So one of the other things we talked about is corruption. Corruption, basically, today we call it putrefaction. So basically, you take an apple and it starts getting a little bit of mold. That mold's going to eventually destroy the whole entire apple. That's what happened from chapter 1 of Romans. When Paul talks about what polytheism did to people, it slowly destroyed them. We even talked about El last week. Anybody remember who El was? He was the Canaanite god, but most scholars believe El means Lord, was actually Yahweh way before this, because he's the only one that you ever find in any polytheism that doesn't have a name. So when Melchizedek comes and meets Abraham, he says, El Elyon. Abraham says, yes, El Elyon, the Lord God Almighty. They were talking about El. They were talking about that. So God was part of it in the beginning, but slowly El got pushed out by Baal, Ashtoreth, Marduk, and the things. So also I gave last week, some of your stuff I gave to you guys were different gods of the different areas. Because if you understand who Asher is, who Marduk is, all these gods, it's going to make a lot more sense when you're reading this stuff. So, all right, let's go on. The temple. The temple is a very important thing. Now, the thing about the temple is it doesn't have a lot of aesthetic value, meaning it was truly made by guys. Okay? No frills, nothing good looking inside of it. It just served a purpose. And truly, that's what the temples of all the other people did. They served a purpose. The purpose was taking care of the idol. That was the whole idea of the temple. It wasn't about preaching sermons. You didn't get a sermon in the temple from these guys. It was all about the idols in it. Remember we talked about last week, they did ceremonies so that their God would inhabit the idol, and the idol would stay there, and they would literally take care of the idol. That's what the temple was for. One purpose, take care of the idol. We'll go on a little bit more into that later. Now, it's interesting. This is a ziggurat. This is an ancient Near East temple, but I also wanted to throw this at you. It's interesting. In South America, they have the same exact looking temples. So all this evolution stuff, and 30,000 years ago, man went to South America. How could they do it when they're literally building the exact same thing as in Egypt? Exact same thing as in Mesopotamia. God is working. So even though these were two pagan gods also, but they just look exactly the same. Now, what's interesting is God's temple was way, way different. It had lots of purpose. Every single part of it, from the wash basin to the altar where they sacrificed the animals, to the Holy of Holies, it was specifically designed for people to understand God. Way different than all the other temples. So, and if you want to understand how the temple was made, Exodus does a good job of going into that. So God did it very, very, very differently than the other guys did. So, taking care of your God, that was a big problem. The concept of personal relationships with God is literally unknown. You did not have a personal relationship with the God. You hopefully can take care of the God, and maybe they can take care of you. We're going to talk about symbiosis, meaning each taking care of each other. One benefits the other. That's the idea. You make the God happy enough, maybe they'll bless you. It's interesting, but it gives you, if you think about that, that's still the same way today. Well, God, I promise I'll be good, and then can you bless me? That's exactly what it was. I'll take care of the God, give him food, give him drink, give him this idol, do all this stuff, and maybe the God will bless me. Ooh, that's not what God's like. But that's what they believed back then. So basically, a piece of wisdom literature said, do not mock a God whom you have not provided with provisions. That's interesting. So basically, you take care of the God, and they will take care of you. Completely different than Christianity and Judaism. God took care of us first, and then we began to worship him and do this. So their gods were always distant. Yes, sir?
Okay, can I share a quick anecdote?
Yep.
The preacher, you knew Ray Wallace, the
Mm-hmm.
preacher at Dodge Street, back in Denver. He went to Japan with his daughter.
Oh, yeah, Shintoism.
He toured a Buddhist temple.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it was interesting. It's this gigantic statue that you can go inside. Because when you look up inside it, it was hollow.
Mm-hmm.
And the person who was giving the tour said that, over the course of the centuries, tsunamis had knocked it off its foundation. They had to put it back up.
So, and we're going to be talking about that because this is the problem with the idols. So taking care of the God, thank you, Paul. It was awakened in the morning. The idol was washed. Now, this is the idol in the temple, okay? It was washed. It was clothed. It was fed 2 meals. Music was played to it. Thus, worship took place by caring for the needs of the God. That's what the temple was all for, taking care of the God. But that's not what the temple of God was for, of Yahweh. That was for us to worship him, to sacrifice ourselves and say, this is what we have for you, God. And then God saying, by that sacrifice, I'm covering over your sins. Big difference. How do you know what God wants? Well, on the experimental level, when circumstances, omens, prophetic oracles, God of such and such is going to come and get mad at you. That's what, seriously. Suggested the deity was displeased, divinatory procedures would be initiated to determine appropriate course of action. We'll talk about that here in a second a little more. So, it was incomprehensible. Their God was incomprehensible to them. They had no clue what their God was like. God always told us in the Bible, in the Old Testament, what he was like. Always. But they had no clue because there was no relationship. They would use divination, witchcraft, incantations, magic. The idea was to find out what the gods were thinking. More of they'd be used to manipulate the gods. Let me tell you, don't do this stuff because God sees it as manipulation. If you're looking to astrology, looking to palm reading, what you're trying to do is go around God to try to find out something. And most of the time, the idea was the people truly thought that you could influence the gods. You cannot influence Yahweh. You can't. Okay? You can't do that. But these guys did all of this stuff. Now, the kings employed up to 2,000 people to find out the will of God, of their God. 2,000 people. It was that important to them. I mean, seriously, it's way important to them. Guess, anybody take a quick guess, what is the number one item they used to find out what the will of their God is? Anybody? What's the number one thing they used? You mean no one's a Mesopotamian scholar? Come on, everybody should know it was a sheep's liver. Not kidding, guys. Not kidding. If you thought sheep's liver, which I'm sure most of you did, oh yeah, it must have been a sheep's liver. Right. Seriously, that's what they would take a sheep's liver and look at the livers for little different things this way or this way, and to them, that's how the God talked to them. I'm not kidding. But again, we got to remember, why do you think God said what he did in the Old Testament? Because this is what people believed. He was combating this kind of junk. They would also use these pursuits to influence the gods, revealing information to the people. They would invoke the name of their God to influence events. They would say, in Marduk's name, you will do this. In Marduk, you're gonna, you've seen that a lot when you're actually going through the Old Testament in Kings, where they're taunting with their God's name. So Marduk's gonna do this to you. That's invoking the name. Okay? However, our God does not let you do that. You should not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The third commandment. We got to understand the first three commandments really are basically based upon polytheism. Don't misuse my name. Now, there was one other point with this. One other point was that God said, if you're going to take an oath, back in the Old Testament that is, not the New. If you're taking an oath, do not take an oath in my name and just don't do it. God's name was very, very important. That is the reason why, if you ever read anything from Jewish historians, Jewish people, they will never spell out God. They'll have G with space, or they'll, Yahweh, but they will never spell it out, because to them, God's name was God's name was that important because of this. Let no one be found amongst you who sacrifices their son and daughter to the fire. That happened a lot. We had a king of Israel that did that. We also had a Moabite king that sacrificed his son, thinking that the reason why do they do it? Because if you sacrifice your son, the God knows you're really serious. Give your son to them. God's going to know. He's serious. I guess I'm going to help him. Seriously. It's crazy. Practice divination. Do not practice sorcery, interpret omen, engage in witchcraft, cast spells. Who is a medium or spiritualist, or who consults the dead. Don't do it. Because again, everything you do, and this is what they did on a daily basis, and Israel and Judah did the same thing quite often. They did that because they were trying to go around God and to find themselves. And we know one big guy that did it. We'll talk about that here in 1 second. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. It was about manipulation. You cannot manipulate God. You cannot manipulate God. Again, the last week's homework was very specific and gives Bible verses to all of these things I'm talking about. So please, if you don't have it, contact me. I can send it to you via text. Trust me, you're going to want to do it. It's worth it because you're going to really see our God is a lot different than that. So let's talk about the guy who messed up and did it. Saul at the Witch of Endor. Guys might remember that in 1 Samuel. Saul was on the out with God. Okay? Things were about ready to go bad for him with the Philistines, and there was no priest there. So it says, it talks about the and Thummim. So you see 1 Samuel 28, 5 and 6. He did not answer by dreams Urim or prophets. Urim and Thummim was basically a thing that was worn on the high priest's outfit that basically said, and they said, God, what do we do here? It was a yes or no thing based on the high priest. That wasn't there because the high priest was likely, because if that was there, they could have used it, but there was no high priest there. Why? Because Saul went way far away from God. Samuel was dead by this time, which blew everything for him. So, what did Saul do? He went to his people and said, hey, find me a medium. Now remember, Saul was supposedly cast all the mediums out and got rid of them all. But guess what? His attendants knew exactly where one was. That's really sad. Yeah, hey, I know. Yeah, I got one right here. She's up there. Wait, I thought you cast all those out, didn't you? How would you know that? Okay. So the thing is, he said, I want to acquire. So they told him where one was found, and that's in the tribe of Issachar. It was still there was still one in the land. Basically, so I bet you $10 people were actually still going to her. Seriously. So they knew exactly where she was. Tribe of Issachar, Galilee. I circled it in black up there where it's at, close to the Sea of Galilee, indoor. Now, it's not in Star Wars, by the way. All right. So what happened is the witch, finally, after Saul convinced her, the witch said, okay. Then she somehow brought back Samuel. Okay, and Samuel, I like what Samuel said. Why do you consult me now that the Lord has departed from you and become your enemy? Guys, let me tell you something. We're going to go over this later on in this class, but there were the two worst. Saul was not the worst king. There were two way worse kings than him. If Saul would have got on his knees before God and repented, I truly believe God would have forgave him, because he did it to Ahab, which was one of the worst kings, and he did it to Manasseh, which was the worst king. The Jerusalem Post did a thing about 10 years ago, who was the worst king? And they all came up, it has to be Manasseh. He was a terrible guy. But they both repented. And guess what God did? He forgave him. Now, Ahab went back to his ways. We don't know about Manasseh, but we know Ahab went back to his ways. He died for what he got what he deserved. But the thing is, Saul could have done this. But look what he does here. What he does here is he bows before Samuel. That's how far he got away from God. He went before Samuel and said, please, can you help me with this? And Samuel's like, no, ain't going to happen. It's all going down for you. Saul and his family died right after this. We need to remember that divination magic were used because their gods did not speak to them or reveal themselves like Yahweh did. We got to remember, Yahweh went to Abraham first. Yahweh spoke to the people from the mountain. Yahweh spoke to Isaac. Went to Jacob. Yahweh did. Now, I'm sorry, I'm calling him Yahweh because that's what we talked, that's from the Old Testament. So that's how I'm actually referring to him. But he would reach out to us first. Trust me, he drew all you here first. By the way, there is no other religion in the world that has a relationship with God. Islam, there's no relationship in Islam. Zero. Yes, ma'am.
In the book of Deuteronomy, when God is talking to the people and he's giving them instructions about where they're going to worship and not worshiping other gods and not reaching out for donations to other prophets and dreamers, he repeatedly says, when he talks about other gods, he puts in parenthetical, gods you have not known.
Right.
Gods that you don't know or that your forefathers don't know. He is stressing over and over again that he is making himself known in a way that no other deity or claim to deity has done.
Now, it's interesting you said, because that's actually going to come up here in the next slide or two. Thank you. In the homework from the very beginning, that's one of the number one things I did in the homework. The first few weeks' homework was, you must do it God's way. And the homework actually said, the way. God says, you must do it my way. You must go to the place I told you. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. We got to do it his way. You cannot do it our own way. These guys, that was the idea. She's right. They tried to do it their own way. Okay? So when Moses was at the mountain of God, God said to Moses, I'm going to speak to these people. So God in the Old Testament spoke to the people, but in all the other places they did not. So let's talk about the king, the state, and their God. The state was now, if you want to understand the state, you think about communism. The state was like ruled by those above, and everything else, everybody had to do what they said. Pretty much, there's no choice. That was really what it was, kind of, in a sense there. It was bad back then, it doesn't work today. But the key is, what happened is the king would worship a god that they believed was giving them favor. This may not be the same God that the rest of the people were worshiping. They were each there. So when I went over major deities like Marduk and Asher for Babylon and Assyria, respectively, they were the king's state's god, who they believed that God is what's totally going over here, okay? They're over that person. So the king would use the temple system to take care of the god to create a symbiotic relationship. Symbiosis is basically the idea of something benefiting you and you benefiting something else. Think of bacteria in your gut. Okay, I used to teach anatomy and physiology. Let me tell you, you've got a lot of bacteria all over you, but it's symbiotic, meaning they benefit, the bacteria benefit because they live, and you benefit because you get stuff from them. Keep you from getting sick and other things. So, the great symbiosis, since the gods thus became codependent on the people, that's what they thought. Oh, if we take care of God, then they're dependent on us. They, in turn, had to provide for and protect them. If crops did not grow, there would be no harvest. And the gods, then the gods couldn't be fed. No harvest? Well, we can't feed our God. Seriously, they really thought, what? Now do you understand why God says, I don't need to be fed? He said, I own a cattle of 1,000 hills. I don't need to be fed. It's in Psalms. If invaders threaten a city, people will not be able to take care of the city. And the gods would be taken. And everything would be gone. So the gods got hurt by it too, what the people thought. Again, this goes back to anthropomorphism. Everything's about humans. If a human thinks it, then the gods had to be that way too. So, what happens if the people think the gods were unhappy? If the divination priests concluded through the arts and omens that the king's life was in jeopardy, you want to get crazy, this gets really crazy. He would step down from his throne. So think about this. The divination guys, I think the gods are mad at you, king. Oh, really? The gods are mad at me? Ooh, I don't want to die. That's the premise there. A substitute would be enthroned for a period determined. So find us a substitute. Chosen by the diviners, he was enthroned, dressed like the king, given royal insignias. He would be given a queen. And eventually which the queen would be given it, share his fate. They were going to die, the substitutes. The idea was, you're there to die. That was what they were there for. Guess what? Hey, by the way, you're going to come in here. You're going to be a king. So you got 100 days. You got 100 days of being a king. Things are going to be good for you. You got yourself a nice looking queen over here. Hey, you got 100 days. But in the end, they were killed. Seriously. And thus, because of that, they believe the omens were canceled against the king. And the king and his prince were redeemed. The substitution was seen as a way of allowing the gods to do what they wanted to do. We're mad at you. We're going to get you. But we substituted them, so please don't get me, the king. You can go ahead and kill them. The ritual was not intended to fool the gods, but to give them a ready victim, whom to carry out their intentions. They would kill them both. The commandment, do not murder. So this is nuts, but you got to understand, when you read stuff in the Old Testament, this was the idea. This is what the prophets talked about. These are very specific things that they talked about. How the Romans saw Jesus. The same thing was when Jesus came. The Romans themselves said, why would a God who is great, enthroned, and everything else like a king become a man? That was a big issue for them. They didn't believe it. Like, no God would do that. We have to take care of God. The gods are greater than we are. We've got to feed him, take care of him, do all these things for him. Well, wait a minute. When Jesus came, he came for us. Not because we did anything, because he was merciful towards us. The God, within the polytheistic and the other systems, they sacrifice whoever it was. Even our own government today, they sacrifice whoever they want to get whatever they want. It's sad. But God does not do that. So one of the things we have to understand that the persecution of by Rome to the Christians in the 3rd and 4th century, by the way, the 390 to 412 is wrong. I'm sorry, it's 100 years, or it's actually 290 to 312. I didn't get a chance to switch it. So the Romans persecuted the Christians. Why? Because the Christians were living a life for God and not for the Romans' gods. By the end of the 3rd, 4th century, Rome was going down. They were losing. They were losing battles. They were doing. Now, here's the point. And look at the very bottom. Instead of looking inward, hey, maybe it's our fault. They thought the gods must be mad at Rome because of the Christians. So that became a major problem. They really thought that. That was the main reason. Gods must be mad because we're not giving them enough. We're not giving them enough worship. We're not giving them enough. We're not treating them correctly. That is exactly what they thought. Now I hope that the idea of the persecutions makes sense. That's why Rome went crazy at it, because they really thought the gods were just going to be mad. But see, the problem is, because of that, the Christians were persecuted, but they didn't look inside themselves. They didn't look inside to say, maybe we're the problems. You know, think about it today in our life today, in our government. Everybody blames everybody else. They don't take it, nobody takes it. It's always something else, someone else's problem. Oh, they did, it had to have been them. They're the problem. See, that was what happened, because in polytheism, it was always someone else. No, I can't take the blame. No way. So, anyway, family religion. We're getting close to being done. Family religion. So the state level did the one big God with the temple, with the dressing, with all that kind of stuff. The family religion was a little bit different. So basically, when the family, at the single person's level, was made up of, above all, of a centrifugal feeling of fear. Meaning centrifuge is something that spins. It's getting worse and drawing more and more and more and more towards the bottom of it. That's how centrifuges work. Draws things toward the bottom. And severity with regard to the divine. That the sacred was portrayed in the human model, okay, anthropomorphism, and was spread out over the whole society of supernatural beings. Basically, the gods are just like us, whose needs people were expected to fulfill. They need to be fed. They need to be They really thought that they need to be fed. Okay? And they are carried out with great devotion. They were devoted to him. Submission and also generosity and ostentation that were thought to be expected by such lofty figures, meaning the gods were thought to be way up here. We need to treat them as kings. We need to be good to them. Can you see the major difference between this and Christianity? God reached out to us. Why do you think Paul said that so much to us? Because this was the idea even at Paul's time. This was the idea. We have to please the gods. We have to do this for the gods. And maybe if we do enough for the gods, they'll be good to us. But it's the same time, you will think about the movies. Oh God, if you just give me this one thing, please. Isn't that the same thing was happening today? If we just beg God enough, oh please God, that's what they're going to do. That's what's going on. So the people did this for the gods, hoping that God would give them a blessing. Hoping, maybe if God's in a good mood today. But a relationship with God was a fragile symbiosis. Inadvertent actions by them could suddenly draw the wrath of the deity, meaning you could do something and the God's now mad at you. Since a relationship with the personal God was offered protection and prosperity, if the God withdrew in anger, sudden vulnerability resulted. So basically, well, the God's mad at me for some reason. Why? Well, because it hasn't rained for 2 years, or it hasn't done this, or hasn't done that. Sickness, failure of crops. for that matter, personal disasters of every sort were attributed to the desertion by the deity. Again, think about Rome and the Christians. Rome said, because the Christians are drawing people away from us instead of worshiping the gods, they're now the evil ones, and they persecuted them. And this is why. One would ask, this is a true Arcadian prayer. I wish I knew these things were pleasing to one's God. What is proper to oneself is an offense to one's God. Meaning that what I think is good for me, maybe the God's mad at it. I don't know. What in one's own heart seems despicable and is proper to one's God. Who understands the plans of the underworld gods? Where have the mortals learnt the way of a god? Basically, the guy's saying, we have no idea about these guys. I do this and they get mad at me. I do that, they get mad at me. Again, there's no relationship. God is very specific. His word is very, very, very much all about, I want to get to know you. I love you. I care about you. Let me show you. Learn my ways. You know, it's interesting in Deuteronomy. You mentioned Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy constantly, learn my ways. Teach the next people my ways. Because the people knew nothing. The gods the people served knew nothing of them. And it's the same way today. Think about it. Does anybody, everybody who has even a simple, small thing about God, I always think about Monty Python with their angry God in the sky and, a head opens up and things go in and all this weird stuff. They think God is just this distant being who is just always mad at us. That's sad. And that's what they thought back then too. With no revelation, there was no way to know what pleased and what angered the God. They would constantly seek for help, but no one would help me. This is a Syrian prayer. I cried, but they did not approach me. I would give lament, but no one would hear me. I am distressed, but I am alone. This sounds like an average American these days, doesn't it? I'm distressed. I'm alone. No one can hear me. No one can see me. No one can do this. Humanity, by whatever name, what do they know? Whether a God does wrong or good, they are ignorant. We don't understand the gods. We don't know them. We don't understand life. Sounds very much, if you think about it, this prayer could be 2025, not just 2000 BC. The plight of those who lived in the world without revelation. In all this, the people ultimately did not know what the gods wanted. Thus, they went blindly into rituals. Well, I'm going to go do, play with snakes, or I'm going to go do this. Even today they do the same thing. All these rituals to make God happy. Incantations, trial and error. Hey, this didn't work. Let's try something else. This has all brought significant consternation to the people because they're like, we don't know what he wants. Let's try this. Well, let's try this. Well, let's try this. Man, what a terrible thing to go through. But that's humans without God, period, is like. We know nothing about in life. Why does everybody hate me? Why is life so hard? With God, yes, sir.
Well, just in Acts 17, where Paul has his sermon on the Areopagus, and the fact that we're all made in God's image.
Mm-hmm.
That from the beginning of history, people have always sought something higher than themselves because we're made in God's image.
Right.
But through this, polytheism, and even today, people want to seek something, but they don't want to take God at His word because that challenges them. They want God to conform to their image.
Exactly.
They can do what they want to do, and they refuse. But they're seeking. They know that something's missing, but they don't want to do it God's way.
Woo, Paul. Impressive. You just hit it right on the dot. You just hit it. You're just amazing, Paul. Gosh, what would I do without you? That's my brother? No? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, so the thing is, you're right. It's all about why I want God to do it my way. What do you think they tried to manipulate God for? Constantly. So now here's the thing is, so now that we're moving past that, let's talk about the idol real quick. Since the God inhabited the idol, if the idol was lost or stolen, as in war or theft, all is lost. Seriously. What do you think if you go and you read the Bible and it talks and these guys destroy this? The first thing they go to is the temple. You see in Daniel that they actually were using some of the instruments from the temple of Judah in Daniel, which made things were not very good. That's where the writing of the wall came on, because that's what they were doing. They were using the stuff of God, thinking that we defeated this God. The God is no longer has any. So what the first thing that they would do if they marched into this area and they took over and they defeated you, they took your God. First thing they would do. And you now have nothing. Because if the God's gone, everything is lost. Happens a lot in the Old Testament. You'll see it through the Old Testament. So, but this will help you to understand Genesis 31. Rachel. Laban was a nasty dude. He was yucky. He treated Jacob very, very, very badly. And finally, Leah and Rachel were fed up with it, and they all left. But to get back at Laban, what Rachel did, if everybody remembers that in Genesis 31, Rachel stole his household gods. You just basically destroyed Laban by doing that, to the Laban's brain. Okay? She hid them in the saddle. Taking them means the gods would no longer bless them. To Laban, his business will now fail. His family could die. Another disaster could befall him. I mean, what do you think he raced after them for? If you go back and read Genesis 31, Laban went after him. He was going to kill him because she took his gods. And the gods is what blessed him. By the way, does anybody recall what prevented Laban from finding those idols?
She said she was on her cycle.
Yes. When a woman was thought to be on her cycle, and this is a common idea back then, the women were thought that the women had demons inside of them. Seriously, that's what they thought. So, meaning you don't want to mess with her because something may mess with you. So, seriously. Not a good thing. So that's what they thought. So that's what. But she lied and said, "I'm on my cycle, so I'm not getting down off my camel." And Laban's like, "Well, I'm not going near you then." Yeah. Okay. All right. Have dirt will travel. We're almost done. Now let's do another thing. They believe that dirt from this country would help the God from that country to be in their country. They would actually take dirt. Now, so basically Elisha went and took care, and then Nahum, which was a general in the Syrian army, came down. He had, I believe he had a skin disease. He came down, leprosy. He came down. Elijah healed him. Everything was good, right? So what the guy did is he said, "Wow, your God did this? My God didn't do this for me. Your God did this. Woohoo! Man, I want to serve." And he goes on, really. He said, "Look, I want to serve your God." So what does he do? But I got to go back home because I got to, I'm a general here. I got to go back home. So I'm going to take the dirt from your country and I'm going to put it in my country. And that dirt will allow me to get to know your God. That's what they thought. So that's what this is all about. Give as much earth as a pair of mules could carry, for your servant will never make a burnt offering, sacrifices to any other God but the Lord. Hey, but seriously, I don't think God was that upset about that. He's like, whatever. If you want to take dirt, whatever. But the idea is they now have he has a relationship with God. That's cool. But the problem is they really thought that by doing this, now we're going to find in Syria, one of the kings of Judah actually built an altar that was just like the Syrian god's altar in the temple down the road here. Thinking that I can now worship Aram or Syria's God here in the temple of God. They actually built an altar in it. Craziness. All right. The end of polytheism in Western society. By the end of the 10th century AD, polytheism has been stepped out in Western society. It took 1,000 years into 8,000 AD before polytheism. By the way, I just threw this in here, just so you know, speaking of Buddha, Buddha and Confucius, they're not deities. Because I'll never forget that I understand when I remember I was talking to Mama-san when I lived in Japan. I'm like, ooh, Mama-san, you talk about Jesus. No Jesus, Buddha. But the thing is, the joke was that I didn't realize it at the time. Buddha was just where she kind of put her, whatever. So that's it. Any questions? Well, it's interesting and the thing is, because Elisha was God's representative to Naaman, that's why he said that to Elijah, actually. Because then Elijah was to pray for him and do this and have the relationship. So let me tell you, God still reaches out to people. God still wants to see people and get to people to know him. Okay? So this week's homework, again, is going to be, please, if you need last week's, please, I'm in Simple Church, just text me. I can send it to you. But this week's homework is to research a few of the prophetic books. You research it, you learn about it, and now you're going to read it, and then guess what? You're going to understand it. Okay? All right, that's it. Thanks, guys.
I would say